Welcome to From the White Pill Box, the podcast where we stomp on statism and find the white pills along the road to a stateless society. I'm your host, Mark Maresca. I'm the author of the Substack articles of the same name, From the White Pill Box, content specifically for the already red-pilled, libertarians, voluntarists, anarchists, people who've overcome the myth of statism or are close to it. It's easy for us to be black-pilled, to believe evil will win. That's where the white pill box comes in. There are real-world reasons to have hope. Let's get going. Greetings, all. Thank you so much for listening today. This episode will be part 10 of my series on the myth of authority. To get a full picture of the content so far, I suggest you review the previous episodes, which I've linked to. Now, we've recently been talking about libertarian strategy. We've discussed how we can either communicate to a person's true self or their indoctrinated self. Their true self is the part we all have in common, the part that favors running our private life like an adult. That's opposed to their false, indoctrinated self, the part that buys into the myth of authority. So a direct strategy speaks to the true self. An indirect strategy does not. It bypasses it and slams head-on into the false self. In doing that, we often risk causing our audience to put up a psychological barrier. Also, a strategy can target the myth of authority itself as the root of the problem, or it can target the state, which is the downstream effect of the myth of authority. When a strategy targets the root, we likewise call it direct, and when it targets only the state with no reference to the root cause, we call it indirect. The indirect style has predominated libertarian messaging and still does. Now, in this series, I've been making the case that the traditional indirect approach very much explains our 50 years of relatively poor results. I've argued that direct strategies have far greater potential for reaching people. I've broken down the indirect approach itself into two types, political and non-political. Of the two, politics has taken up a large bulk of libertarian efforts. So altogether, it's safe to say that for 50 years, the predominant strategy used by libertarians to deal with statism has been the indirect method, largely by way of politics. I've mentioned recently that I would devote a full episode to my views on using politics as a means to advance libertarian and anarchist ideas, and this will be it. This will also be timely. Today's episode is being released in October 2024, just a few weeks before the presidential election in the United States. On that point, if it hasn't been entirely clear to you up till now, I am not a fan of politics, and so today we'll need to save up our white pills for a later episode. But I do acknowledge that some of you do favor politics as a strategy, so I'll understand if you find this episode challenging. I hope it gives you something to think about. You may want to listen to it both prior to the election and after it. Just a suggestion. Now, I'll be drawing a good deal of today's content from the article I wrote in 2018 and published online by the Libertarian Institute entitled An Open Letter to Advocates of Liberty, which you'll find linked. The article essentially explains the futility of politics as a strategy for promoting the ideas of freedom, that it's not only mostly a waste of time, but can actually work against us. In there, you'll also see the germination of my thoughts concerning speaking directly to the true self, even though I did not put it that way. I want to credit Scott Horton, who was kind enough to publish my article back then. I've also drawn some of today's content from my Substack essay entitled Politics as a Libertarian Strategy, also linked. Okay, we're going to attack this subject using the general templates I've used previously in analyzing other subjects. One of these will involve addressing both the moral and practical sides, and the other will involve the psychological perspective. We'll start with the moral aspects, which won't take much time because they're pretty straightforward. We are all free will agents. We choose our actions. When we do so, we have a sense of the consequences, even if we don't know all possible, imaginable consequences. That's why we look both ways before crossing the street, rather than just take the action of walking across the street. When we drive a car, we're watching what's in front of us, rather than, say, playing cards. In most actions we take, we are fairly conscious of at least the obvious consequences. We do this not only to avoid our own suffering, but also to avoid harming others. This is called acting responsibly. It's a part of acting morally. However, notice that when we take the action of voting, we can't possibly predict the downstream effects of that action. We as libertarians know that in our own small way, by voting, we are empowering someone to act in the framework of the state. And even if our guy loses, we empower the winner because we participated and legitimized it. We cannot predict the consequences of voting because obviously we cannot predict the future actions of the winner. By any meaningful definition, we've taken an irresponsible action. Remember, we've acted in the context of politics. That context, the world of politics, is provably immoral because it violates consent every minute of every day. We are participating and sanctioning that system by voting. I'm sorry, but unless a gun is to our head in that voting booth, we've taken an immoral action. Let me say this another way to make it plain. We hold libertarian views because they are moral, and by moral, we mean they respect the consent of human beings over their body and property. Voting sanctions the violation of consent. This lesson can hardly be clearer. Voting sanctions the immoral outcomes that, with almost 100% certainty, ripple out from the act itself. You can try to argue that your one vote is only fractionally culpable. Okay, do that. But I'm unclear how that would make you feel better. Now, there is a valid exception to this. It's the rare exceptions where political efforts can result in tangible improvement. I'll cover that next as part of the practical arguments around political participation. We'll break this down into the two reasons libertarians choose politics. One is trying to achieve actual changes. The other is to spread the message of liberty. We'll start with the first. The most immediate and obvious problem with politics for libertarian changes is that it hasn't actually worked in practice. Libertarians rarely win, and libertarian issues rarely win. There's no getting past that. Yes, I realize a decent amount of libertarian politics has tried to focus on local races like city council seats, school board positions, etc. But even these victories are rare. And yes, I too have heard the stories from scattered libertarians that a particular county reduced fees here and there, or pulled back on certain victimless crime laws, or victimless crime enforcement. If pure practical considerations alone are the standard, then yes, those are debatable points. But there is nothing like that at the larger state or federal level. But then there's the point, once again, about what one vote can do anyway. The chances are minuscule the one vote will actually make the difference that leads to the results you want. So basically, the immoral stuff is going to happen in virtually all cases, whether your one vote is cast or not. It's a waste of time. So you might think, why not do it? And I would think, why bother to do it? Since the action makes no difference, I have to assume you do it because it just makes you feel better. Okay, I guess, but even that deserves an explanation. Why would it make you feel better? You're achieving no practical positive result, although for sure you are making yourself part of an immoral system. And you're doing that very publicly. What makes you feel good about that? Or maybe you really are trying to argue that your vote nudges things in the right direction, even if it's a minuscule amount. Well, if you're serious about that, then be serious. Think it through. You're saying that you want to take an action, voting, that, in your opinion, will have a positive effect, though you do admit the action has a very small influence on that. Okay, so this means you see value in the action. If you were not to vote, you'd not get the effects you want, so you vote. Okay then, but now use the broken window lesson we all learned in Libertarianism 101, which I'll link to. Don't just focus on one effect from your action, the one you immediately see, or the one you happen to like. Look at all the effects, like this one. For each person you see persuaded by these ideas by way of politics, are you seeing the hundreds or thousands turned off, perhaps forever? Because politics misrepresents the movement. Or this one, the unseen negative effects on participants themselves, all the infighting, false accusations, etc. that I'll be talking more about later. Not to mention the unexpected victims I alluded to. Your candidate or measure, whatever it is you're voting for, will almost definitely have downstream effects that are not anticipated. Are you sure all those unexpected effects will be harmless? If you're realistic, you'll remember that most unexpected downstream effects of government are bad. They create more victims. So are you okay with that unseen effect? I'd remind you that refraining from voting eliminates any culpability you'd share for those outcomes. And then there's the unseen effect of legitimizing the system. You are for sure doing that by voting. Everyone in your social circles who know that you vote are being further indoctrinated into statism by you physically taking actions that legitimize it. Everyone at that voting station, the workers, other people, all of them, see you doing it. You contribute to the aura of legitimacy. You do that when you vote. And I know this next one is not so much an unseen effect, but it sure is likely with politics. Let's say you get what you want in some election. You do realize that the next time around, the statists can easily undo it all, right? Put in new laws or people who aren't so much on your side. Well, democracy in action, I guess. But anyway, take all those outcomes into consideration when you vote or participate in politics in any form. Weigh them all fairly. My hope at least would be that your conscience would steer you away from it. Now, having said all that, there are also what we would call targeted and specific reasons to employ politics. These are cases where activists are trying to overcome a specific state intervention. Now, if these efforts are realistic and sincere and reduce victims, I don't think we can fault them. But remember, being realistic means acknowledging they are the rare exceptions. We can imagine, for example, an initiative being put to a vote to reduce property taxes from 10 to 5%. If it really were this simple, obviously reducing victimization without creating new victims, you can argue that voting for it would be justified. It'd be the same as letting concentration camp prisoners vote to get milk with their meals instead of water. You'd hate that they're in prison, and morally you wouldn't sanction that, but if the system gave them some control over their bad situation, there's no reason they need to suffer more than they'd have to. But back in reality, really, how often are the issues that are put up to a vote like my property tax example? Rarely. Even if a tax reduction is proposed, it's often coupled with tax increases somewhere else. This makes the victimization unpredictable. So no, we actually don't see real-world examples out there very often that actually reduce victimization. But some libertarians try to take this idea and stretch it. They kind of stretch the meaning of that lesson to justify voting. They want to pick one candidate over another with the excuse that he'll do less damage than the other. They are stealing the idea of reducing victimization and trying to say that'll happen if their candidate wins. Sorry, I'll call BS on that. It's unreasonable to claim you can reliably predict what one candidate will actually do in power versus another. And beyond what he would actually do personally, you also can't predict the dynamics of what happens with your choice in power, how the losing voters will deal with it, how the administrative state or other politicians will behave, how foreign actors will behave. Politics is an impossible craps game. Each throw, no one knows how many dice there are, how many sides to each one, how each side is marked. No one knows any of it. So when a libertarian or anarchist claims that they want a particular person in power over another on the basis of their sense that one will do less damage than the other, they're engaging in wishful thinking. Sorry, we of all people should know better. Wishes don't make things come true. In summary, politics to achieve practical goals is a rather poor strategy. Now let's move on to the other reason libertarians justify political participation: messaging. So here, they have little or no interest in changing actual statist outcomes. Instead, they're claiming to play the long game, so to speak. They have an anarchist or libertarian message and are using the broad platform of politics to get their message out. So here, once again, intellectual honesty requires we look at all the effects. And frankly, I've never seen a single political type doing that, looking at all the effects. They've married themselves to the assumption that politics offers them a bullhorn. They get to yell into one end, and at no cost, they think their voice comes out nice and loud at the other end. Well, their good intentions are wonderful, but unfortunately, they do not actually accomplish striking the root. They never even acknowledge that by engaging in politics, they are personally legitimizing it. Okay, yes, I realize that every once in a while, rarely, someone speaking on politics slips in there that the whole system is illegitimate. That's okay, I guess, but those are hidden in the noise. Everything else, they say, only reinforces statism. If they really felt delegitimizing the state was priority, I'd expect that to dominate their content, not petty political details. Instead, they reinforce the state. People come away thinking that they need to beg or ask permission of the rulers to change things. People come away thinking they need masters making the rules. It's no wonder freedom advocates who get involved politically feel demoralized over time. They see only crumbs of progress or even see things going 2 steps back. But it's their own fault. They're trying to reduce the state, which is merely the bad downstream effect of the myth of authority. The myth stays firmly in place. Getting demoralized seems inevitable. And look what it's done to some people in the movement. They hitch their wagon to libertarian politics and in one way or another get sorely disillusioned. After that, for whatever reason, they do not redirect their efforts to outside of politics. No, some of them double down. In a nutshell, they are prepared to play the game of politics full bore. They sadly lose some of their integrity. They now perceive power as the true engine of social change. They figure that those already in power know it, and now they know it. So now they want that power. They decide that the ends justify the means. Basically, whatever it takes to hold power, do it. And they regard people as sheep that want to be led and deserve to be. Using my terms, they take people's myth of authority indoctrination as a permanent state. They want to make a freer society by running the show that way. I've heard libertarians, or I guess former libertarians, actually speak this way. Well, credit for honesty at least. These are the types who have abandoned morality and principles. They think they're smarter than most people. They know better. But this all means there's nothing distinctive about these types compared to regular politicians. The state has shown it is ready to be as brutal as necessary to hold power. These lost libertarians have joined that crowd. There's not much I can say to these types. This series is not for them. As I've already shown, and as I'll show even more in upcoming episodes, statism is on the way out. These types, if that's their strategy, then they're just another set of bullies. They'll be in the rearview mirror soon enough. Okay, now, I've slammed the lost libertarians pretty hard, right? Well, I'm not done, because now I've got a few words directed to you. If you're still a political participant, I would ask this. Isn't your participation really just a reaction to the scolding you've heard all your life? You've heard it. If you don't participate, you're doing nothing. At least politics is doing something. Okay, well, we already covered why you're actually not accomplishing what you want. Half-century of effort has made that pretty clear. But let's bring in that pesky broken window fallacy again. What's the seen and unseen? Well, for sure, when you play politics, you are doing one thing. You're strengthening the myth of authority, and with that, the state. We've covered that one. So what else do you get for your political efforts? Well, politics is toxic. I just mentioned how it's corrupted the thinking of some activists. But even in maybe not as dramatic ways, look what it's done to some of the libertarians who've run for office, or to those who are involved in the Libertarian Party. There's been bitter infighting, lawsuits, unethical behavior, false accusations, groupthink. There have been vicious battles over political issues like border control and immigration, censorship, even more. What should be positive, synergistic relationships become emotional hate fests. And what does all this do from the point of view of the newbies observing all this? Ever think of that angle? The principles of liberty get distorted due to politics, often permanently in the minds of the unfamiliar. Not a very positive outcome of your long game, is it? How about all the wasted resources, the actual time, effort, money spent in politics? We're supposed to think outside the box. Can we use that imagination and consider how those resources could have been better spent? Remember, strategically, our ideas, which shine outside of politics, are at a permanent disadvantage in politics. Look at all the ways. Our ideas are philosophical and rational. Politics is the opposite, based on emotions and false perceptions. Incompatible. We advocate consent to get things done. Politics relies on force to get things done. Incompatible. We urge people to think as individuals. Politics requires groupthink. Incompatible. We want the market where everyone gets what they want. Politics? All or nothing. Incompatible. We want clarity. You lead yourself. Politics wants the myth of authority, which means politics wants delusion. Incompatible. It's the broken window fallacy, and libertarians in politics are falling for it start to finish. They don't measure the unseen effects against the positives they like to see. Sorry, friends, politics is not a bullhorn. It's a sewer drain. We place our ideas into the sewer lines of politics and do not attend to what comes out the other end. Okay, I know I've bashed political strategies pretty hard there. I want to move on to the psychological part of the discussion, where we can at least understand, even relate to, why libertarians fall into the trap of politics. To start, it's born from our positive vision for humanity. We understand how free minds and free markets achieve betterment for our fellow men. Yes, we want it passionately, but it's grounded in reality. So, right there, we feel the strength of reasoned arguments, the proof of practical reality, And all that leads to our passion to act. And that's where our indoctrination can get the better of us. We're indoctrinated to see politics as the primary way social changes happen. So we're psychologically drawn to politics to fulfill our desire to act. Along the way, that mental trap of the myth of authority has trained us to disregard the reality of politics, to disregard all the obvious and blatant negatives I talked about before, to disregard how politics actually interferes with the spreading of our ideas, how it corrupts them and corrupts us. But now think about how we can arm ourselves psychologically by focusing on the myth of authority as the root cause, by truly internalizing the myth as the central problem we have to overcome first, and then help others to as well. When you really see the value of that as the correct laser focus of strategy, politics takes on a whole different look. After that, we no longer run to politics. It's obviously not a very good tool to persuade others they don't need leaders. Hell, it's affirming they need leaders. It's the worst tool. So now it's the libertarian political types who have the uphill struggle. They're on the defensive now. It's they who have to justify why they play politics. They need to ask themselves, why am I doing this? Am I satisfying a psychological need? Maybe deep down, you do it because you get a sense of community. It's a chance to be open about your opinions without judgment. The friendships are gratifying. You feel supported, not judged. And know what? I'm not going to slam that. We hold a truly minority perspective on the world. I get it. But if that's your main motivation, just be honest about it. Don't extend that reason and then convince yourself you're actually moving the needle forward. I would hope you see the toughest uphill struggle of all that you create for yourselves with political activism. Basically, an impossible-to-solve math equation that goes something like this. How do you get people to not want leaders by encouraging them to vote for leaders? You know, when I think of it that way, then my mind finds itself pondering how the state would see it. I know the state is a disembodied collective, but I sometimes think about if it could speak, if it could actually express what it wants. I imagine asking the state, say 50 years ago, hey, state, we've got this new movement, libertarianism, anarcho-capitalism. Hey, state, how would you hope they spend their time so that they run in circles, waste their time, so that their ideas never really catch on? I think the state would cross its fingers, it would close its eyes, wish and hope that they engage in politics. Please put all your efforts there. Please just attack the symptoms. And especially, please don't attack the myth. Heck, reaffirm it and keep the misdirection going. Well, the state has mostly got its wish. Politics has twisted up our efforts for half a century and continues doing it. The state would be proud. I'll wrap things up with my very blunt assessment, if I haven't been blunt enough up to now. This is for those libertarians and anarchists who continue to spend their time in politics. You know the principles. You understand the non-aggression principle. You understand the state violates it every minute of every day. You especially know the destruction it causes. And you know the answer, which is to see the state go away. And hopefully I've added to that insight with this series so far, that the root of the state is the myth of authority. And that's what needs to be overcome in order for the state to be shrunk to eventually nothing. Okay, you know all that, but you choose to validate the myth and validate the state by engaging in politics. You think you're moving towards your goal by incrementally working within politics. Let's be honest. No, you're not. Admit that you've downgraded your principles. Admit you've settled for politics. You're telling the slave, don't bother trying to free yourself. Accept reality as it is. Admit it and then decide whether you really want that to be your legacy. that you left the principled fight for your kids to deal with. I think you can do better, and I'm pretty sure you know that too. If any of us live to see the day when genuinely stateless territories emerge, that's the day we'll all know statism is nearly over. So, don't you want to look back and say that you were working toward that? Or will you remember yourself settling for politics like everyone else? And on that note, we'll wrap up this episode. We'll be dispensing some real white pills as we continue this series on the myth of authority, but that'll do it for today. Take care and see you next time. Many thanks to Substack for hosting my podcast and my articles. And thanks especially to you for listening. And remember, keep looking for those white pills.